Sewer creatures have been making headlines for decades, but it is rare to encounter anything this big and this disturbing.
What?
Ever wondered what secrets are hidden within one of the world's most infamous ghost towns? From mutant dogs to the eerie red forest, here are the 20 weirdest and most terrifying things recently discovered in Chernobyl. Number 20. Worms with superpowers. Scientists from New York University have studied worms living near Chernobyl's exclusion zone, and what they've discovered is quite surprising. It turns out that deep within the radioactive zone of Chernobyl are worms with superpowers, but not the ones you might think. Somehow, despite living in radioactive soil, with the creatures burrowing into it day in and day out, the genomes of these nematodes remain remarkably intact. This means they're naturally resilient to radiation, having developed resistance over time. The rapid reproduction of these worms, which allows them to go through dozens of generations in a short period, has provided scientists with a unique window into their evolutionary adaptations. While other animals in the area have shown signs of genetic mutations, these worms appear to have developed a remarkable capacity to protect and repair their genetic material. Today, these seemingly insignificant worms have intrigued researchers who hope to learn from them in understanding how to survive radioactivity. Number 19. Radioactivity still tainting cow's milk 100 miles from Chernobyl. Almost 40 years after the catastrophic Chernobyl disaster, radioactive contamination continues to linger in surprising ways. Today, we still see the aftermath of the disaster in cow's milk. Researchers discovered that cow's milk is still contaminated, even from bovines living more than 100 miles away from the explosion site. Studies conducted in Ukraine's Rivne region revealed that milk samples from local farms contain levels of radioactive cesium up to 5 times the safe limit for adults and 12 times the limit for children. The radiation levels, primarily from cesium-137, continue accumulating in the soil and vegetation that cows feed on, and consequently, it passes into the milk. Some settlements in this region report contamination levels of up to 500 becquerels per liter, well above the government-imposed safety limits of 100 becquerels per liter for adults and a mere 40 for children. This poses significant health risks, particularly for children, who are the main consumers of local milk. Long-term exposure to radioactive elements like cesium can affect almost every part of the body, especially increasing the risk of cancer and other serious illnesses. While the government has taken some measures to mitigate the risks, these measures have not been consistently implemented. Without further action, scientists warn that contamination levels in milk will remain dangerously high until at least 2040. Number 18. Radiation-eating fungi. Humans aren't the only creatures that persevere in difficult times. Nature continues to persist despite the atrocities committed by humankind. This is further proven by an astonishing discovery in 2007. Just 21 years after the nuclear disaster, Chernobyl was still mostly devoid of life. Yet, amidst the highly radioactive environment, scientists discovered several strains of fungi that were feeding off radiation. Somehow, these organisms survived and thrived in a highly radioactive environment, right in the reactor's ruins. The secret of this organism lies in melanin, the very same pigment that gives our skin its color. Researchers found that these fungi use their melanin to absorb gamma radiation and convert it into energy, a process known as radiosynthesis. Sort of like photosynthesis, but instead of sunlight, they use deadly radiation. This adaptation allows the fungi not only to survive but to grow faster in radioactive areas. In fact, researchers found that these fungi gravitated toward the most radioactive spots within the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone. Scientists are hopeful that these fungi could help us. NASA has been studying them, thinking that one day they could protect astronauts from cosmic radiation during long space missions or even on future colonies on Mars. In 2018, a small sample of the fungi was sent to the International Space Station, and the results were promising. They could potentially act as a natural, self-replicating radiation shield for space travelers. Although research involving these radiation-eating fungi is still in its infancy, it gives us hope that someday nature around the exclusion zone will regain its past vibrancy. Number 17. The mutant dogs of Chernobyl. Almost 4 decades after the Chernobyl disaster, a group of survivors is now thriving in its wake. Canines. Mutant canines. The dogs of Chernobyl somehow managed to survive and continue living in one of the most radioactive environments on Earth. To do that, they needed to adapt. Scientists discovered that these dogs are now genetically distinct from other dog populations. But how did this happen? When the Chernobyl reactor exploded in 1986, it forced thousands of people to evacuate, leaving their pets behind. While many dogs were culled due to fear of radioactive contamination, some survived and formed feral populations in the exclusion zone. These dogs now live in a harsh radioactive environment that few animals have ever experienced for such an extended period, giving scientists a rare opportunity to study the effects of chronic radiation exposure on a large mammal population. Dogs living near the nuclear power plant within the exclusion zone exhibit genetic markers that set them apart from other populations. These genetic distinctions could be due to long-term radiation exposure, environmental isolation, or a combination of both. While their genetic diversity is lower than that of other free-breeding dogs in Ukraine, they've survived for generations in an environment no one expected them to thrive. Scientists hope these studies will shed light not just on how radiation impacts animals but also on humans, since dogs share similar environments and diets with humans. The genetic changes in Chernobyl's dog population might help us understand the effects of prolonged exposure to radiation. Now, these dogs might be called mutants, but they're still animals domesticated by man. Instead of culling them, several organizations have begun neutering and spaying these dogs before vaccinating them, ensuring that they have a better chance of surviving in the isolated land of Chernobyl. Number 16. The man behind the Chernobyl nuclear meltdown. Anatoly Dyatlov, the man at the center of the Chernobyl disaster, remains one of the most controversial figures from that fateful night in 1986. Dyatlov was the deputy chief engineer in charge of Reactor 4, where a routine safety test spiraled into the worst nuclear accident in history. Known for his authoritarian management style and technical expertise, Dyatlov made several critical decisions that contributed to the reactor's explosion. On the night of the disaster, it was said that Dyatlov pushed ahead with the ill-fated safety test, overriding multiple safety protocols despite being warned of the reactor's instability. Dyatlov's insistence on completing the test caused a dangerous reduction in reaction power. When the emergency shutdown button was finally pressed, it triggered a catastrophic explosion due to a design flaw in the reactor's control rods. In the moments following the explosion, Dyatlov ordered operators to manually lower the rods, further exposing them to lethal radiation. He refused to believe the reactor had exploded until it was too late. However, he wasn't the only one to blame. Many argue that the Soviet system itself, with its emphasis on meeting production goals and its flawed RBMK reactor design, played an equally significant role in the disaster. Dyatlov himself maintained that, while he made mistakes, the accident was the result of systemic failures. Despite receiving a lethal dose of radiation, Dyatlov survived for nearly a decade after the disaster. Though he faced severe health issues, he passed away in 1995, insisting that the real fault lay with the political and scientific institutions of the Soviet Union. Now it's time for today's topic. The 1986 Chernobyl nuclear disaster left a haunting legacy, with radiation levels so high that entire towns were abandoned, becoming ghostly reminders of human error. For decades, the exclusion zone has remained a no man's land, with only daring scientists entering to study the long-term effects of radiation. Recently, during a routine exploration inside one of the highly radiated reactor buildings, a team of scientists stumbled upon something deeply unsettling. Among the rusted equipment and crumbling walls, they found what appeared to be a living creature, a pulsating gelatinous mass measuring over 10 feet in length. Unlike anything seen before, the creature's flesh seemed translucent, revealing faint movements inside as if it had internal organs or some form of circulation system. What's more terrifying is its rapid growth. Within 24 hours of discovery, the creature's size had doubled. Initial studies revealed the mass contained DNA fragments from multiple species, but none of them could be conclusively identified. Scientists believe the extreme radiation may have triggered an unprecedented mutation, creating a living organism that defies known biology. Speculation is mounting. Is this the result of decades of unchecked radiation, or could it be something even more ominous? The team has since sealed the building, warning that the creature's uncontrolled growth poses a potential threat if it ever escapes. The eerie discovery raises chilling questions about the long-term effects of Chernobyl's fallout and what other horrors might still be hidden within the zone. Number 15. Brown bear spotted in Chernobyl. For the first time in over a century, brown bears have been spotted in the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone. Caught on camera by researchers using traps set to monitor wildlife, these creatures show that life is slowly returning to the exclusion zone. The reappearance of brown bears, apex predators in the region, suggests that the ecosystem is recovering enough to support complex food chains. In addition to bears, researchers have also documented lynxes, wolves, and bison thriving in the area. These sightings indicate that the absence of human interference has created a unique environment where wildlife can flourish despite lingering radiation. Remarkably, some species appear to be expanding their range, using the exclusion zone as a corridor to connect with other wilderness areas. The bears were seen engaging in natural behaviors, such as foraging and marking territory, which are critical signs of a healthy population. Scientists are hopeful that the return of these animals could inspire new conservation efforts in other human-abandoned zones. It seems that the absence of human activity over the last 3 decades has allowed the zone to transform into an accidental wildlife sanctuary. Hopefully, this recovery will continue in the future. Number 14. First product after the disaster. This bottle is a delectable vodka, one that even the most passionate spirits experts might hesitate to taste. Atomic vodka is crafted from rye and water sourced from none other than the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone. Despite its association, consumers can rest assured that it is not radioactive. What makes this vodka special is the fact that it is the first consumer product to emerge from the zone since the 1986 nuclear disaster. The way this vodka was made is quite interesting. Scientists from the United Kingdom and Ukraine have taken rye lightly contaminated with radiation, distilled it, and created a completely safe vodka, proven through rigorous testing by experts at Southampton University. The vodka itself is described as a bit like moonshine, with a flavor profile more aligned with traditional Ukrainian distillation method. The project, led by Jim Smith from the University of Portsmouth, has a deeper mission beyond making vodka. The Chernobyl Spirit Company aims to reinvigorate the local economy and support the communities that still live near the exclusion zone. Profits from the sale of Atomic are being reinvested into these villages, which have seen little development since the disaster. So buying this vodka helps rebuild lives in the region. Now that's a toast-worthy cause. Number 13. The mutant wolves of Chernobyl that are immune to cancer. Aside from dogs, there are also wolves living around Chernobyl, and they too, like their domesticated kin, have developed an extraordinary ability that helps them survive in the radioactive environment. Resistance to cancer. Yes, that's right. After being exposed to high levels of radiation for nearly 4 decades, these wolves seem to have evolved genetic mutations that protect them from developing cancer. Scientists tracking the wolves with GPS collars first noticed that the animals had adapted remarkably. Researchers believe that the wolves' immune systems have adapted in a way similar to cancer patients undergoing radiation therapy. Their immune response appears to fend off DNA damage that typically leads to cancer in other species. The wolves live in an environment where radiation levels are 6 times higher than what's considered safe for humans. Despite this, they seem to thrive, exhibiting no significant health decline. Genetic analysis has revealed mutations in the wolves' DNA that could offer a form of resistance to cancer. This breakthrough could have far-reaching implications for cancer research in humans. If wolves are capable of such an adaptation, perhaps through research we can figure out how mankind could achieve the same. Number 12. Radioactive lump of death. Deep beneath the wreckage of Chernobyl's Reactor 4 lies one of the most infamous remnants of the 1986 nuclear disaster, the elephant's foot. This massive, lava-like blob formed when the reactor melted down, combining molten nuclear fuel, concrete, and other materials into a deadly mix called corium. This unholy combination of chemicals is lethal and has only formed a total of 5 times in all of history. The elephant's foot, being one of the most lethal, was so radioactive that just 30 seconds of exposure would leave you dizzy, and 5 minutes could be fatal within days. Initially, the elephant's foot emitted about 10,000 Roentgen per hour, enough radiation to kill anyone nearby in minutes. To put that into perspective, standing near it for an hour was like receiving over 4.5 million chest X-rays at once. Even from a distance, this mass of corium, roughly the size of a person, was a lethal force that required extreme caution just to photograph. Despite its horrifying lethality, the elephant's foot wasn't composed entirely of nuclear fuel. Most of it was a mixture of melted concrete, sand, and reactor materials, all fused together during the meltdown. Over time, the radiation levels have decreased, but it still remains dangerous today. Researchers study corium to better understand nuclear accidents and how to prevent them. Replicas of the elephant's foot have even been created in labs to help scientists safely investigate the unique properties of this toxic material. Though it's no longer as deadly as it once was, the elephant's foot remains a haunting reminder of the catastrophic power of nuclear energy gone wrong. Number 11. The sarcophagus and the world's largest movable land-based structure. There is a sarcophagus in Chernobyl, but it's nothing like the ones you see in Egypt. Rather than a relic left behind by an ancient civilization, this sarcophagus is humanity's last hope of containing a lethal mistake. The design of this structure began on May 20, 1986, only 24 days after the disaster. Its construction, however, lasted for 206 days, from June to late November of the same year. The sarcophagus locked in 200 tons of radioactive lava-like corium, 30 tons of highly contaminated dust, and 16 tons of uranium and plutonium. Its construction was difficult, with workers battling against time, but its installation was arduous. Years later, the structure already needed repairs, but reinforcing it would be difficult. Thus, the new safe confinement, NSC, was built. Unlike the sarcophagus, the NSC was constructed over 9 long years with a budget of $2 billion, or $2.6 billion in today's money. At approximately 354 feet high, 531 feet long, and 843 feet wide, The NSC is the largest movable land-based structure in the world. It was constructed in a clean area and slid over the reactor in 2016 using an intricate hydraulic system that moved at 60 centimeters per stroke, covering a distance of 1,072 feet. The entire operation took around 5 days. This colossal structure will prevent radioactive dust and debris from escaping for at least the next 100 years while also protecting the old, decaying sarcophagus built immediately after the disaster. While the arch is in place, the work at Chernobyl is far from over. The next phase involves dismantling the existing sarcophagus and managing the 200 tons of radioactive debris inside Reactor 4. With this project funded by donations from over 40 countries, the world hopes that this will be enough to seal the aftermath of the nuclear disaster. Even though the NSC will prevent further radiation leakage, ongoing maintenance and monitoring will be required for decades. Number 10. An unexpected otter. Despite the lingering contamination, life has started thriving in Chernobyl. Take, for example, this unexpected resident, an otter. The otter, typically seen in healthy aquatic environments, is a particularly hopeful sight as it suggests that waterways within the zone have regenerated to a state that can support life. Interestingly, researchers have also documented a resurgence of other species, including beavers, moose, and rare bird species such as the white-tailed eagle. These animals appear to be adapting to the altered environment, demonstrating nature's resilience even in the face of significant challenges. What's more, the fish population in these waters has also rebounded, providing a steady food source for the otters. Scientists are closely monitoring these animals for signs of genetic mutations or other effects of radiation exposure, though initial findings suggest they are largely healthy. This thriving biodiversity highlights the unintended ecological impact of human absence in the exclusion zone. With this otter happily feeding on fish in waters near the exclusion zone, scientists hope that one day Chernobyl will return to the thriving ecosystem it once was. Number 9. Recovery. Children whose parents were exposed to Chernobyl radiation no longer have excess mutations. In a significant breakthrough for radiation research, scientists have confirmed that the children of parents exposed to the Chernobyl nuclear disaster do not carry any excess genetic mutations. This finding comes after years of concern that radiation exposure from the 1986 accident might pass harmful genetic changes to the next generation. Researchers sequenced the genomes of 130 children born to parents who were directly exposed to radiation, either through cleanup work or proximity to the explosion. They found that the number of mutations in these children was no higher than in the general population. This is reassuring news, especially for those affected by other nuclear incidents, like the Fukushima disaster in 2011. The results suggest that while radiation can certainly cause health problems, such as cancer, in individuals directly exposed, it does not seem to lead to transgenerational genetic damage. Number 8. Chernobyl Shadow, the secret Soviet radar. Deep inside Chernobyl is a woodpecker, but it's not what you think it is. The Duga radar, also known as the Russian woodpecker, is a structure towering over 490 feet high and stretching over 2,290 feet in length. This colossal over-the-horizon radar system is a remnant of the Soviet Union's ambition. This giant structure was built to detect incoming intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, from over 3,000 miles away. It was a shadow that watched over potential attacks. Why is this structure so close to Chernobyl? Simple, it needed the nuclear plant's power. Such a colossal structure required enormous amounts of energy, much of which was supplied by the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. When this radar was functional, its size was so imposing that it became infamous for disrupting and interfering with radio communications across the globe. The radar's transmissions produced a repetitive tapping sound, earning it the nickname Russian woodpecker. Amateur radio operators worldwide were baffled by the strange noise, which interfered with signals from Europe to North America. Despite numerous conspiracy theories about its purpose, it was eventually revealed as part of the Soviet Union's missile defense system. The Duga radar was active from 1976 until the late 1980s, shortly after the Chernobyl disaster, when the site was abandoned. Today, the radar is a haunting remnant of the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, visited only by dark tourists in the past decades. Number 7. The Red Forest. Although breathtaking to witness from above ground and from afar, the Red Forest, located just a few kilometers from the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, is one of the most lethal forests on Earth. It is one of the most radioactive places on the planet. Since the disaster, the trees were killed almost instantly by radiation levels 1,200 times higher than what a human should be exposed to. These trees were eventually bulldozed and buried as part of the cleanup efforts. Yet, life flourished in the place once again. Pine trees with reddish-brown leaves replaced the once lush greenery. Despite the attempts to contain the radiation, the forest remains a hotspot of contamination, with radiation levels ranging from 1 to 10 millisieverts per hour, far more lethal than the dose a human can tolerate. To this day, the red forest still poses a significant danger. Forest fires, like the one in 2015, can release radioactive particles trapped in the vegetation, spreading contamination far beyond the exclusion zone. Despite the risk, many continue to visit the red forest in hopes of capturing photos of its crimson trees. Number 6. The abandoned ships of Chernobyl. In the Erie waters near Chernobyl is a fleet of rusting ships. This ship graveyard is located in the backwaters of the Pripyat River. When the disaster happened in 1986, these vessels were abandoned. These ships, once used for transport, were deemed unusable. While some vessels were salvaged and torn down for scrap, others were caught in the wrong place at the wrong time and became heavily contaminated with radiation. Others were intentionally brought to the site to support the cleanup, only to be left behind once their work was done. Over the years, these ships have been slowly succumbing to decay, their rusting hulls sinking into the murky waters of the river. Some of these vessels were even used to carry radioactive waste, sealing their fate as permanent residents of the exclusion zone. Number 5. Food grown in Chernobyl. 3 decades after the disaster, researchers returned to Chernobyl to study crops grown near the exclusion zone. They only proved their hypothesis. Radioactivity in this place would remain for years more. Crops like wheat, barley, rye, and oats continue to absorb radioactive isotopes such as cesium-137 and strontium-90, which were released during the 1986 explosion. These isotopes are still found at unsafe levels in various food products, including grains, milk, and mushrooms grown in the regions around Chernobyl. Cesium-137, with a half-life of about 30 years, remains a persistent problem because it is easily absorbed by plants, especially in the forests surrounding the exclusion zone. For local communities, the challenge is compounded by economic struggles, which force many people to rely on locally grown food despite the risks. Some residents still consume radioactively contaminated milk and bread. Unlike bacteria, which can be killed with heat, cooking radioactive crops does not remove their hazard. Unfortunately, with monitoring programs cut in 2013, many of the residents near Chernobyl are left in the dark about the true safety of their food. Number 4. Chernobyl having 10,000 tourists a year. The 26th of April marks the anniversary of the explosion, and in 2015, 29 years after the tragedy, Chernobyl saw a rise in tourists, with 10,000 visitors annually. The exclusion zone is a 1,800 square mile area that includes the abandoned town of Pripyat. Visitors can see residential buildings overtaken by nature, a desolate amusement park with its iconic Ferris wheel, and even wildlife that has flourished without human activity. Visitors from all over the world come to Chernobyl, most of whom are dark tourists. Dark tourism, also known as thanatourism, involves traveling to places historically associated with death and tragedy. Of course, traveling to places like this requires respect. Visitors who have seen museums marked with death aren't automatically people who enjoy morbid tourism. As of 2014, countless articles have been dedicated to discussing this matter, with travel writers like P.J. O'Rourke calling his 1988 travels to Warsaw, Managua, and Belfast holidays in hell. Today, there are many subcategories of dark tourism, but the most important thing about this is that visiting places like Chernobyl or the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park in Japan requires the utmost respect. Due to recent incidents, however, Chernobyl is now filled with landmines and other possibly hazardous explosives, putting a halt to dark tourism in the area. Number 3. The mutant frogs of Chernobyl. Dogs, wolves, fungi. It seems that almost every creature in Chernobyl has developed a mutation of some sort. This includes frogs, specifically eastern tree frogs. Usually, these frogs have a bright green color. Yet researchers discovered that those living in Chernobyl have evolved to become much darker, with some even turning pitch black. Just like the fungi, these frogs are using melanin to protect themselves from radiation. This pigment can absorb and dissipate radiation, which helps protect the frogs from the harmful effects of the radioactive environment they now live in. This process of natural selection likely began shortly after the 1986 disaster, when frogs with darker skin were better able to withstand the radiation and pass on their traits to future generations. Over the past 3 decades, this rapid evolutionary change has made darker-skinned frogs the dominant type in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Melanin not only shields the frogs from radiation but also scavenges harmful molecules, preventing significant cellular damage that radiation can cause. Number 2. The haunting cafe of Pripyat. Overlooking the outskirts of Pripyat city is a quaint cafe still decorated with stained glass. This was once one of the most popular spots for the residents of Chernobyl. Cafe Pripyat, also known as the Dish by locals, was once a place of leisure where residents would gather for drinks, relax on the sun-drenched terrace, or enjoy sailboat rides during the summer. With its unique circular design and terrace, it provided stunning views of the lake, making it a favorite for picnics and socializing. One of its most remarkable features was the large, ornate stained glass windows that depicted vibrant abstract figures. Even today, remnants of these colorful windows remain, though shattered and weathered by time. Unfortunately, the disaster happened, and shortly after, the cafe, like the rest of Pripyat, was abandoned. Now it is slowly being reclaimed by nature. Trees grow through cracks in the concrete, and the shoreline is overgrown, blending the once bustling cafe into the eerily quiet landscape of the exclusion zone. Number 1. The community for survivors. The disaster in Chernobyl is the most tragic nuclear incident in the world. On the 27th of April 1986, 45,000 residents were displaced. The following month, 116,000 more were displaced from their homes. Out of these people, about 1,000 returned unofficially and chose to stay within the contamination zone. After all, it's in the human spirit to persevere. And so, Slavudik was built. This city was created for the survivors of the Chernobyl disaster in 1988, just 2 years after the meltdown. It was built 31 miles from Chernobyl and became the last city ever built by the Soviet Union. Today, it stands as Ukraine's youngest city. To build the city, architects from 8 Soviet republics gathered and gave their own ideas, with each designing a district inspired by their own cities. There's a Vilnius district, a Riga district, and even a Baku district. Before the city was established, a 6.5-foot layer of uncontaminated soil was laid to ensure the city would be safe from radiation. In this place, no building stands taller than 5 stories, and lush pine forests its streets. It was initially imagined to be a paradise, a haven. In fact, this city once had the highest birth rate in Ukraine. However, its peak was short-lived. If you venture to the city today, you'll see its wide-open central square. In the center stands a place meant to host a research facility, but with the collapse of the Soviet Union, it never materialized. At the turn of the century, in 2000, the city faced an economic downturn. Its residents launched project after project, hoping that the next one would revitalize the city. However, the city that was originally meant to be a paradise didn't work exactly as planned. Today, the city continues to fight for its future, hoping that better days will come. The nuclear disaster at Chernobyl stands as one of history's darkest chapters, at least for us. For those who lived through it, it's a grim and haunting part of their reality. If you know of other dark moments in history you'd like to discuss, feel free to share them in the comments below. Don't forget to check out the videos appearing on the screen, and I'll see you in the next one.